Well, thanks for making time for this. I'm very excited for this conversation.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to it.
Yes, thanks everyone else for joining us on this Instagram Live. My name is Taylor Ward, and I am the Communications and Education Manager at Just Solutions Collective. For those who don't know, Just Solutions Collective is a national nonprofit, and we hope to identify and promote just solutions to climate change from Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and frontline diasporas through the creation of reports, analysis, and more, all about just solutions in energy, climate, and policy, and all of those great things. And today I am joined by Jacqui Patterson. Jacqui, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Jacqui Patterson. I am the Executive Director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. So it's really a joy to be with you.
Yes, wonderful. Cool. Well, today we're talking about COP27 and your experience there. Preparing for this, I was like researching so much about COP27, and there seems to be like so much that goes into it. So if you could start by sharing a bit about your and your team's experience, who all went with you, and kind of just a general sense of what happens there.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe I'll start with what happens there so we have the context, and then I'll go from there. So yeah, so the COP27, the COP stands for Conference of Parties, and it's the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise known as the UNFCCC. And it has been going on for 27 years. That's why they call it COP27. And every year, I mean, most people have heard of the Kyoto Protocol, and that was one of the so every year the members of state and you know the heads of state for the different countries and delegations from different countries come together to talk about what their agreements are going to be in terms of addressing climate change. And so like the Kyoto Protocol was one of the agreements that was reached in one of these such meetings. And so when it's a binding, like every I don't know how many years, they'll come to a binding agreement. And the Kyoto Protocol was a binding agreement. And then there was the Paris Agreement, which was a binding agreement. And so, and I'm not sure what the intervals of the years are, but COP27 is as I said, the 27th Conference of the Parties. And they're calling it the African People's COP because it was on the continent of Africa. And it was a significant one also because not only with this one being what they're calling the African People's COP, but also because it is happening in the midst of the UN Decade of People of African Descent. And it also was significant because of where we are in terms of catastrophic climate change, which each year the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change putting out a more dire warning than the last. And so a lot of the focus here was on what they call loss and damage. And as we've seen the different disasters and the losses that people are incurring, that was a big conversation. So the Chisholm Legacy Project really decided that this was going to be the year that we were going to focus on putting race, racism, colonialism into the discussion in a way that it hadn't been so far. And so we put together with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, we actually convened this group that we had first convened at the launch of the UN Decade of People of African Descent in 2015, this Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative. But we really relaunched it this year, and together with that collaborative, which consists of 39 plus countries, we put together this resolution on race, racism, and climate reparations at the UNFCCC. And so in terms of who it was, I was in there because I was along. It was myself, Denise Abdul Rahman, who really led our work on this in terms of convening that Global Afro-Descendant Collaborative. Kathy Eglin, who is the chair of our advisory committee. Paloma Pavel, who is a dear friend with a group called Breakthrough Communities. And then we had others such as Adrienne Hollis, who was on our advisory board, but wasn't officially with our delegation, but she was also there, and so many other kind of colleagues that we were in coalition with and community with there.
Love it. Yes, thank you for that wonderful explanation.
Sure.
I'm very at the stage. So coming away from that experience, what do you feel like were some, either the biggest takeaways or the biggest things that you were considering going into that space?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for us, the the things that we were considering was again putting in what really hadn't been there in terms of real conversations around race and racism. When I first went to the COP in 2009, there was I was struck because the Pan-African Common Justice Alliance was marching through the halls, kind of doing an action, and they were chanting 2 degrees is suicide, and 2 degrees meaning if they weren't going to commit to significant emissions reduction to keep the planet warming at 2 degree at 1.5 or less, then we're really going to be in trouble. And I was struck that they weren't kind of talking about it in the context of genocide, because it was countries in the global south, Black nations and so forth, that were being harmed first and worst. And I was just struck by, even among Black folks there wasn't really that much talk about racism. And so I had some learning to do myself in terms of the fact that racism isn't a big part of the way our allies and comrades and so forth talk about this in a lot of ways. And so, but at the same time, as we started to raise it in the context of racism, colonialism, and so forth, there was a lot of resonance. So for us, it was just about inserting that frame and also building unity amongst the African diaspora from throughout the world. So, and the UNFCCC became kind of a muse and a context for that. But in some ways, the coming together of us was really our goal more than anything, and our uniting around not only race and racism from a negative standpoint, but also the power and possibilities of our people and what it looks like when we unite.
I love that. I love that so much. And you gave a really amazing talk recently about the multiple issues facing women and frontline leaders. So what is your perspective on how COP spaces or spaces like these do or do not support Black women leaders and community?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say that when you look on the sidelines, whether it's the side events or otherwise, then you see the leadership, the powerful leadership of Black women in the COPs and otherwise. And you see how Black women have risen to leadership and power and voice through so much that is against that leadership and power and voice. And so that is always awesome to behold. And at the same time, when we're talking about the UNFCCC itself, it continues to be, even though the official name is Conference of Parties, they also call it Conference of Privateers and Conference of Polluters and other kind of whatever negative P words they can come up with associated with the extractive economy. So as such, in terms of actual power in that space, then I would say Black women are some of the least in terms of official power, because it is the polluters and the corporations that hold so much sway over what happens there. And then industrialized nations who allow themselves to be puppeted by those industries. And then industrialized nations that want to hold on to some level of, they want to deny their level of responsibility to what's happening around the world. And so, yes, I'm always just inspired and by seeing the power and of Black women as they're speaking and as they're wielding, standing in their power, and at the same time the established structures are actually counter to that power. So
Yeah, that's wonderful.
mm-hmm.
And I think future COPs can learn from the experience that you and your team had this year.
So one of the things in putting forward that resolution, the demands that we were putting forward was that racial justice that they establish a racial justice focal point, which is they have on kind of special issues or areas of work like trade unions or indigenous rights and so forth. They have these focal points. And so we've said racial justice needs to be a focal point. So that's something we were fighting for going forward. That racial justice needs to have a constituency group. So again, those very populations, women, there's a women's constituency group, there's a youth constituency group, again, trade unions, indigenous rights. So racial justice needs to be alongside that. And so for us, we're really pushing for that going forward so that we begin to really not just talk about as we said, racism in terms of the past, but also talk about the again, power and promise in our leadership as Black folks across the world. But then keeping in mind what the past means to the present is this whole conversation around climate reparations, recognizing that, you know, globally, the U.S., for example, is 4% of the global population, but 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. So we really do need to get serious about the fact who's being hurt first and worst, who has been held back because of colonization, and who needs to pay for the wealth that they've amassed on the backs of the planet and Black people and other racialized people. So we definitely are pushing for that as we look into the future.
Thank you for that. I'm like, yes to everything.
Thank you.
If anyone who's on the call has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. But I have one last for you, Jacqui. So looking forward to this next year, are there any priorities that, you know, coming out of COP27 that are kind of influencing the work being done at the Chisholm Legacy Project?
Yeah, thank you. So as a matter of fact, just today, right now, as I see I'm in my car, I am coming from a meeting of African parliamentarians, actually, who were reflecting on COP27 and what the outcomes were there. And they have started a group of African parliamentarians focused on climate change. And so we're looking forward to continue to build those ties with groups like that. There's a Afro-descendant in the Americas Forum on climate change, and we're looking forward to building relationship there. Continue to build up the Global Afro-Descendant Leadership Initiative on climate justice to beyond the 40 countries that we have gathered now to more. We are also putting out, I meant to put this out at COP27, but there's so much going on. But in January, I'm putting out a paper that's called 15, the name, it's to be titled, but basically it's 15 ways that Black Americans are differentially impacted by climate change, but 45 ways that Black Americans are leading on solutions. So often when it comes to talking about climate change and Black folks, it's just kind of pathologized, talking about the problems, which are definitely because of the disproportionate impact, but also talking about why leadership, people are closest to the problems or closest to the solutions, as the adage goes. And so not only are putting out that paper for the sake of, you know, in the United States, but also inviting the other countries that are part of the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice and collaborative to do the same, so that we're really building the story of not only the ways that we're differentially impacted and what's owed in terms of climate reparations, but also the ways that we are already leading on solutions, and that needs to be supported and that leadership needs to be followed. So that's what we're looking at going forward as we think about our work around the UNFCCC and beyond.
Love that. That's amazing. That's so exciting. I can't wait to. Really looking forward to that.
Thank you.
That's the end of the questions.
Okay.
Thank you for joining, and thank you, Jacqui, for making time. I don't see any questions from the audience in the chat, so we'll just go ahead and wrap this up. If you want to Chisholm Legacy Project, please check out their work, check out their website, their social media accounts. They're doing so many wonderful, great things, and this Instagram Live is just a very small taste of the great things. And you can stay connected to us at Just Solutions Collective the same way, our social media, our website, and we look forward to doing more work with you, Jacqui, in the future.
Thank you.
Wonderful December.
Thank you. Take good care. Thanks again for having me. It was a pleasure.